Jakarta was just waking up. The sun was rising, people were boarding trains, sipping coffee, reading newspapers, thinking it was just another ordinary morning. But just minutes later, that calm was shattered. Two trains, each packed with hundreds of passengers, were speeding toward each other on the same track. Neither one knew what was coming. No warning, no signal, no chance to escape. What followed was one of the deadliest rail disasters in Indonesian history. A crash so violent, survivors described it as being hit by a wall of metal and fire. How could two trains collide head-on in broad daylight? Who made the fatal decision that sent them straight into each other's path? This is the story of the 1987 Bintaro train crash, a disaster built on pressure, miscommunication, and a single decision that changed everything. In 1987, Bintaro was a town in western Indonesia. It was located about 12 kilometres, or 7.5 miles, southwest of downtown Jakarta, and 16 kilometres, or 10 miles, north of Depok. At that time, the area around Bintaro was still heavily wooded. But over the years, Jakarta's rapid growth changed the landscape. Today, Bintaro is no longer a quiet town. It has become a district of the capital city, with a population of over 50,000 people as of 2010. Bintaro sits along the Jakarta-Kota to Anyakidul railway line. This main rail line was opened in 1900 during Dutch colonial rule. It runs for about 140 kilometres, or 87 miles, and was built to connect Jakarta with the western part of Java Island. Several branch lines were added to support it, and it remains an important rail corridor even today. In 1987, the section where the crash happened was still a single track. One of the trains involved in the crash was KA220, an express passenger service running from Jakarta to Rangkas, about 65 kilometres or 40 miles southwest of the capital. On the day of the accident, it was heading out of the city with around 500 passengers on board. The train was pulled by a BB 30617 diesel locomotive, built in West Germany by Henschel. Coming from the opposite direction was KA225, a passenger train travelling north from Merak on the island's west coast to Jakarta-Kota, one of the capital's main stations. It was a similar type of train, but since it was an early morning service heading into the city, it was extremely overcrowded. Around 700 passengers were on board. At the time, a dangerous habit had become common, known as train surfing. When there wasn't enough space inside, people would climb onto the roof of the train cars, or even hang onto the front of the locomotive just to get to work. KA225 was no exception. That morning, it carried several passengers not just inside, but also on top of the train and all over the locomotive. On the morning of October 19th, 1987, Sudimara station was already full. At around 6:30 a.m, a passenger train from Jakarta had arrived and stopped on track 2. Meanwhile, track 3 was occupied by a row of parked freight cars. Despite this, the dispatcher at Serpong station, located just south of Sudimara, cleared the northbound KA225 to continue its journey from Merak to Jakarta-Kota. He did this without checking with the staff at Sudimara station. As a result, KA225 arrived at Sudimara at 6:45 a.m. and took the last available track. But KA225 was supposed to wait at Sudimara to let another train, KA220 coming from Jakarta, pass through. Now that plan was impossible. All 3 tracks at Sudimara were taken. Still, by 6:45 a.m, KA220 had already left Kebayoran station, about 10.3 kilometres or 6.4 miles north of Sudimara, and it was heading straight toward it. Realising that the trains could no longer pass each other at Sudimara station, the dispatcher quickly called Kebayoran station, the last place where that could still happen. He hoped KA 220 could be stopped there in time. On the platform at Kebayoran, a station worker, similar to a guard or watchman, used a signal lantern to tell the driver of KA 220 to wait. But then, something went terribly wrong. Just seconds after the lantern was shown, the train began to move without permission. It left the station, heading straight towards Sudimara. At the very same time, the dispatcher received confirmation. KA 220 was already en route. Now, both trains were inside the same single-track section, moving toward each other. Another worker rushed forward, waving a red flag and another lantern to stop the train. But it was too late. As a last resort, the dispatcher sent someone on a motorbike to chase down the locomotive. But the train was already too far ahead. As KA 225 moved northbound through the forested curve, it reached about 45 kilometers per hour, or 28 miles per hour. At the same time, KA 220 was heading southbound at 25 kilometers per hour, or 15.5 miles per hour. The tracks were surrounded by trees. Visibility was poor. The curves in the line made it even worse. By the time the two train crews saw each other, it was already too late. Both drivers hit the emergency brakes, but with only seconds to react, it wasn't enough. The driver of the northbound KA 225 jumped from the locomotive at the very last moment. The driver of KA 220 threw himself to the floor of his cab. At 7:05 a.m, the two trains crashed, head-on. The locomotives took the full force of the impact. Passengers riding on the lead cars and those clinging to the outside of the trains were thrown violently onto the tracks or slammed into the opposite train. KA 225's lead car climbed up and over the locomotive, crushing everything in its path. The front of the train lost all interior space, and anyone still hanging on the outside stood no chance. The crash killed 153 people, though some reports say the number may be between 139 and 156. Most of the victims had been riding on the outside of the train. At least 254 others were injured. Miraculously, both drivers survived. The northbound train's driver, however, suffered serious injuries from his jump. There was no radio system on the line, no modern signals, nothing that could warn drivers or link stations together. Orders were given manually, and often by guesswork. With no way to prevent conflicting commands, one mistake was all it took. From the beginning, it was clear human error was at the heart of this disaster, and that mistake would lead to the deadliest train crash in Indonesia's history. The investigation revealed something shocking. Neither train had permission to be where the crash happened. Both were supposed to wait at their previous stations. So how did they end up on the same single track, heading straight for each other? The truth remains unclear. KA 220's crew may have grown impatient, worried about falling behind schedule, and left without waiting for the green light. But when questioned, the driver firmly denied this. He claimed he was given permission to depart Kebayoran station. The dispatcher, however, told a different story, insisting no such clearance was ever given. Somewhere between those conflicting statements lies the fatal mistake. The story of the northbound train, KA 225, was even more complicated. When the driver recovered enough to speak, he revealed something important. He couldn't see the station worker's lantern signal because passengers were blocking his view. Desperate for answers, he asked those clinging to the outside of his locomotive what the signal was. They told him, "It's clear to go." So he went. He didn't recall seeing the second signal, a red flag and another lantern meant to stop him. But even if he did, things were chaotic. Some witnesses claimed the lantern being waved had a green light instead of red, possibly a panicked mistake by station workers. With his view already blocked, even if the driver saw a light, it may have been green, and he may have never seen the red flag at all. In the aftermath, justice was swift and unforgiving. Both train drivers, the conductor of KA225 and the dispatcher at Kebayoran station, were all put on trial. Each was found guilty of negligence causing death. KA225's driver received the harshest punishment, 5 years in prison. He insisted he was only acting on what he believed were orders, but the court didn't agree. After the tragedy, big changes were made. Indonesian Railways, known as the DKA, installed radio systems on all their trains. For the first time, drivers could talk directly with dispatchers and each other, without needing phone calls. The Jakarta-Kota to Anya Kidul Railway also got a modern signalling system. This new system reduced the risk of misread or contradicting signals caused by poor communication. One of the biggest reasons so many people died in the crash is still a problem today. In Indonesia, riding on the outside of trains, even on the roof or hanging off the locomotive, is a common and dangerous habit. This risky behaviour didn't stop after the disaster. In fact, many believe it even helped cause it. Authorities have tried everything to stop it. Police were sent to pull people off the trains, only to be chased away by crowds throwing stones. Musicians were hired to sing songs about train safety. Riders ignored them. Trains were covered in oil, barbed wire, and even sprayed with red paint. That didn't stop them either. Even religious leaders were asked to speak out, but the message didn't land. Some do it because trains are too crowded. Others want to avoid paying for a ticket, and some just do it for the thrill. Whatever the reason, hundreds, sometimes thousands, still risk their lives every single day riding on the outside of trains. In 2012, officials tried something shocking to stop rooftop riders. They built a metal frame over the exit of a Jakarta train station and hung large concrete balls from it, each the size of a grapefruit. The idea was simple. Anyone still on top of the train would get hit and be forced to get off. But even this dangerous method had little effect. The truth is harsh. Dozens of people die every year from riding outside of trains, even without a crash. And yet, people keep doing it. Now we want to hear from viewers. What do you think needs to change? Should the government do more? Share your thoughts in comments below.